case you have a problem with that, you may not want to put your face or name up here. We used to do that in our city council meetings, and some people kind of forgot that they were recorded, so we felt we would let them know that. We have an exciting speaker today. I'll introduce him later on, but we're going to start with Tino Rossi, who works for the campaign, and he's got a few things to bring us up to speed to the week. Tino?
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, May. As always, you guys are wonderful hosts. I always enjoy getting the opportunity to speak with you. As they mentioned, I'm with the Proposition 15 campaign. Specifically, my job is to help manage our supporters, our coalition partners, and stakeholders. And I'm really excited to give just a quick update and brief overview of Proposition 15 and how we got here before I turn it over to our special guest. First of all, I want to make one thing very, very clear. If there's one thing you take away from today's presentation, it's to recognize Prop 15 is the single largest property tax increase in state history at $11.5 billion per year, every year should it pass. So how does Prop 15 generate that revenue? Well, in order to start with that question, we got to rewind all the way back to 1978 and begin with Proposition 13. Many of you may remember during that time, homeowners, businesses, veterans, seniors were experiencing skyrocketing property taxes. It created a ton of uncertainty in our state and made many fearful that they'd no longer be able to hold on to their homes or their businesses. Recognizing the need for a solution, a citizen initiative was placed on the ballot in 1978 and overwhelmingly approved by voters. Nearly 65% supported the idea of Proposition 13. And here's what Prop 13 did. It said that all properties in California will be treated the same in terms of property tax assessment. So it said that property tax bases are capped at 1% of your purchase price and cannot be increased by more than 2% year after year. So if I bought a home or a commercial building for $100,000 in 1978, my property taxes were $1,000, and I had the certainty of knowing that as long as I didn't make any improvements or change the ownership, my property taxes would only increase 2% of that $1,000 year after year. This ushered in more than 40 years of certainty for business owners and homeowners and has been one of the most stable and certain revenue supplies our local governments have. Fast forward to 2020, and Proposition 15 aims to directly undermine the protections outlined in Prop 13. Some of you may have heard the term split roll initiative. And the reason Proposition 15 is coined split roll is because it would literally split the roll so that residential properties continue to enjoy 1978 Prop 13 protections, but commercial and industrial properties would lose those protections. Prop 15 requires that commercial properties worth $3 million or more, or commercial and industrial properties owned by someone with $3 million or more in aggregate of commercial and industrial properties have those buildings reassessed every 3 years, at least every 3 years, at fair market value. As you can imagine, this undermines the certainty and stability that Prop 13 provides and introduces extreme volatility for our business owners here in California. You're going to hear specifically about some of the impacts on local government today from our speaker, but I want to make sure to make one thing clear. Proposition 15 is a direct threat to two groups specifically. One, small business owners. Proponents claim that only the biggest, richest businesses in California will pay this tax. Don't believe it for a second. NFIB surveyed their members here in California and found that nearly 80% of small businesses in the state of California rent the property they operate on. And in almost all of their rental agreements, they have what's called the triple net lease. Through this triple net lease, the tenant's responsible for things like increases in insurance, maintenance, and yes, property taxes. Meaning if Prop 15 is passed and $11.5 billion in revenue is generated, it's going to come on the backs of our small business owners. Small business owners like your favorite deli down the street, your favorite dry cleaner in the strip mall, the restaurant that gave your kids or your neighbors their very first job in town. The businesses that truly make California communities great will suffer greatly if Proposition 15 passes. And as many of you know, if businesses have to pay higher costs, there's a second set of folks who are going to have to pay higher costs. And that's us, the consumers. $11.5 billion in revenue doesn't appear out of thin air, and it's going to come on the backs of our small businesses and at the expense of consumers. It's no secret California faces an affordability crisis. Many of our communities are meeting the challenge every day to provide food, shelter, and utility for their families. Any threat to their affordability and their ability to maintain a quality of life here in California, especially during the COVID pandemic, should be met with a resounding no. So just to recap, generally speaking, Prop 15 is the largest property tax increase in state history. It threatens the viability and success of our small businesses and will be directly passed on to consumers in the form of higher costs for goods and services, from daycare to groceries to healthcare to diapers. Everything we buy and use will become more expensive under Prop 15. Before I pass it back to Mr. Huff, I want to highlight one additional thing. We've known Proposition 15 was coming for a while. As early as last year, we knew it was going to appear on the ballot. So we started testing it. We wanted to know what likely voters thought about Proposition 15. In April of 2020, about 55 to 56% of likely voters here in the state actually supported Proposition 15 and increasing taxes on commercial and industrial properties. Thankfully for the support of leaders like our speaker today and the Huffs and our great coalition, our bipartisan diverse coalition, over the last 6 months, we've been educating voters on the flaws, one of which you'll hear about today. And I'm proud to announce that as of 2 weeks ago, some survey results have the proponents testing near 50 or below 50%. So I say that to encourage you to keep going. Let's keep this fight up because we've got to make sure Proposition 15 fails in November and we're on the right track. We've just got to keep going. So that's the quick and dirty overview of Proposition 15. Mr. Huff, May, I'd like to hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Tino, and thank you for that clear summary of what we're facing here. And, as we're getting closer to the election, this campaign is ramping up. And people, when they hear this message, they tend to resonate with the message that Prop 15 doesn't work for them and it's bad policy. So that's what we're banking on, and that's why we have you with us today to help understand this message and push it out. Anything you want to say before we introduce our speaker?
No, as usual, at the end of the presentation here, I will do the closing in Chinese, sort of a clean up for after Mr.
Yeah, clean up, and I can't even understand what she's saying, so it's all works. Our next speaker we're pleased to have is Mike Gatto. I got to know Mike when he served in the state assembly at the same time that I did in the state senate. We both termed out in 2016. In fact, the first 2 years he was in there, I think our districts overlapped a little bit over in the La Crescenta area, Burbank, but regardless, Mike was one of those guys that worked his way up the Democrat leadership pretty fast. He introduced many signature bills. The one that he is probably remembered mostly for is, you can see it on cars, the old vintage black plate with yellow script. He introduced the legislation on that, but that certainly isn't his main legacy. It's just very visible. Mike grew up in LA. He got a bachelor's degree from UCLA and a JD law degree from Loyola, and he's a founding member of law firm Actium. Mike, welcome. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you so much for being here and for taking some time to learn about the flaws in this proposition so that you can inform everybody who cares about making the right decision when you vote. You've already heard many of the flaws articulated by Tino. I want to underscore and emphasize how much this will hurt small businesses. Any business who is under a triple net lease is going to face the biggest tax hike that they've ever faced. And that's going to hurt the entrepreneurial spirit. So many immigrants, my family's, many of yours, come to this country because they wanted opportunity. And now to tell them that we're going to increase our taxes right after the COVID crisis, I think is a tremendous mistake. But I've been tasked today with talking about how this measure will affect local governments. Of course, all of us want to live in cities that have paved streets and police that come when you call for them, and everything from trimmed trees to well-paid-for schools and all the things that local governments have to pay for. They're very important to our quality of life. Well, this measure would be extremely detrimental to local government because it requires the hiring of 900 new assessors and appraisers. And you think about that, and you think about the profound costs that local governments are going to have to eat. It is estimated that those costs would be over $1 billion that it would take directly out of the coffers, directly out of the money that local governments have to spend on other things, like schools. I'm a parent of 3 children. They go to public schools, and I hope someday that they will attend Stanford or UCLA or many of the good schools in California. But to now be asked to vote on something that not only is going to crush small business, but is going to take $1 billion out of the pockets of the people like me who depend on schools to deliver services and depend on our county governments to make our quality of life good, that's not something that I'm willing to do. You can also imagine how busy and how difficult this is going to be for county assessors. For those of you who don't know, county assessors are the people who are tasked with determining how much a property is worth. And you can imagine the fights that they're going to get into with this. Someone is going to knock on the door of your business and say, your business is worth, $7 million. And you're going to say, no, I don't think it's worth 7 million. It's worth, 6.2. And there will be a big fight that ensues. There will be a lot of bureaucracy. There will be a lot of hassle for the business owner. And frankly, there's going to be a lot of hassle for the county government. So, who's the big winner from this? It's bureaucrats. It's people who don't really have a role in society other than being a functionary in a government cog. The second thing is that there's many small cities. Many of us live in smaller cities, and people sometimes forget that California is a very big state, and we've got so many different communities in the state. And yeah, maybe some of the big cities will get a lot of the share of the money, but small and rural counties will actually lose money. And that is something that I'm also not okay with. I think we have a moral duty to stand up for people who live in smaller communities. It's just part of life in this state. And for those of us who live in smaller communities, we don't necessarily want to face our local governments losing money. I talked a little bit about taxpayer rights. You imagine getting a bill where an assessor says that because the assessor is so busy and the new county employees that they hire are not used to doing this work. They're hiring 900 new employees and they're not used to doing this work. And so they give you a bill and they say, oh, your property is worth this, pay more taxes. Or if you're somebody who rents, if you're a business who rents, they tell your landlord that their property is worth more. Your landlord passes the cost on to you. And now you are trying to fight this assessment. Can you imagine the hassle, the bureaucracy, the time it will take from doing the thing that small businesses do best, which is making money, offering a product to the community, plus employing people. And then finally, there's a long delay before any of these benefits, these alleged benefits, will even come out. The Nonpartisan Legislative Analyst's Office concludes that it will be till 2025 that, assuming all of these major hurdles are implemented, it won't be until 2025 that we see any type of benefit from this measure, if you assume that there's a benefit at all. So, this is a measure that will crush small businesses. It will cost a lot of money to local governments. It'll take away from a lot of the services that we like, good schools,